Spectrum wants to hear your views. You can SMS at any time during the show. Type Spectrum, leave a space, type in your contribution and name, then send it to 7197. Your views, our interviews on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
A very warm welcome. This is Spectrum on Radio 1. My name is Edmond, Kizito, your host. On Spectrum tonight, we review the week. We'll be looking at the East African Legislative Assembly elections, which have gone into a stalemate. The capture of Caesar Ashilam, the EALA former head of intelligence, he's no longer there. He was captured. Free after 1,000 days in prison. Several Uganda youths who have been in prison for over 1,000 days were released by court after this court found there was no evidence to pin them on terrorism charges. The arrest and detention of the youths following the 2009 Uganda riots was condemned by many people, and the ruling by this court was welcomed by many. Now the lawyers say they want to compensate those young men, compensating men and women. We look at that, and public salaries frozen. The government says they cannot give any salary increments, according to Prime Minister Amama Mbabazi, because they are setting up a commission. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? We'll also talk about the internal crisis or apparent inside of the FDC, the main opposition party. Our guests tonight, Mr. Nicholas Opiyo, legal consultant at AKIJUL. You're most welcome, Nicholas.
Well, thank you very much, and good evening, Edmond, and good evening to all the listeners and those who are viewing us online.
We're also joined by Dr. Bainomugisha, head of the Peace and Security Program at ACODE. You're most welcome, Dr. Bainomugisha.
Thank you, Edmond, and good evening, dear listeners and viewers.
We expect to be joined by Honorable Mike Sebalu, Ugandan representative of the East African Legislative Assembly, and Mr. Asuman, Basalirwa, president of the JEEMA party. Nicholas, today the NRM voted to adopt rules under which the election of Ugandan MPs to the East African Parliament will be voted, but the opposition walked out. They say they are going to petition the East African Court of Justice on the matter. Shall we ever see an end to this, Kulabalu?
Well, I'm always hopeful. I mean, so I think in that sense that at one point we shall see the parties agreeing on how to proceed, because from the very beginning of elections of the East African Assembly, it's been a very messy affair. All of us recall what happened with the now Deputy Speaker of Parliament when he, after assisting the President to amend the term limits, he then crossed to the NRM. He left the UPC and attempted to contest for the East African Assembly under the movement ticket. He was roundly defeated by the Honorable Dan Kidega, and he went to the East African Court of Justice. He went and sued the state of Uganda. He tried to get a decision to get himself into the assembly, and he failed. So from the very beginning, the EALA elections have always been murky. There have not been any clear rules defining the election. I think that arises, in my view, from a very selfish and wrong interpretation of Article 50 of the treaty, because my interpretation of the treaty is that members of EALA need not necessarily only come from Parliament. Okay? It doesn't necessarily mean that members of EALA should be members representing the parties in Parliament, because I think the first clause, subclause of Article 50 of the treaty is very broad. It says, in as far as is feasible, it must represent parties in Parliament, shades of opinion, gender. So the constituent for election of EALA is much broader than just the parties in Parliament. So that concept having not been appreciated much by people in Parliament, we now have a situation where we think that the EALA should only elect members representing parties that are in Parliament. That, in my view, is a wrong construction of the treaty, because from the time we began to think that that's the position, we then ran ourselves into problems, because then if you confine yourself to Parliament, you're going to have a situation where, like now what you're seeing, the NRM trying to argue that because they are the majority in Parliament, they therefore should have a lion's share of the seats. You see, that I think is where we get it wrong. Secondly, I think we also haven't conceptualized the importance of representation at EALA. In my view, our membership of this of East African community transcend our own party, national party positions. People we elect to EALA don't represent parties. They represent the country.
Well, but there has to be guidelines.
There has to be guidelines, I agree. But the principle being that a honorable member going to EALA should not go there to present the NRM. No. Because they're actually members of the, of EALA, representing the country Uganda. So once we then begin to narrow it down to representing parties that I'm FDC, I'm DP, you're therefore going to run into a problem. But we need to conceptualize this as members of EALA representing Uganda and Ugandans, not particular sheds in Parliament alone. That, I think, for me, is the problem. And I think the sooner Parliament begins to accept and conceptualize the entire notion espoused in Article 50 of the treaty, the better for this country. Right. We wouldn't have these problems. In my view, we wouldn't have these problems. Because the treaty is very clear. The court has made a decision, not once, not twice, but many times. Right. So I think that the court has exhausted its explanation of this article. It is now up to us to put aside our political differences and put Uganda first and begin to look at EALA as a country representation, not a party representation. To begin to look at EALA as people representing not just parties in Parliament, but also other people outside of Parliament. Right. It therefore wouldn't hurt to hear perhaps independent people who don't belong to any party contesting for EALA and having a seat at EALA, as long as they have views and shades that they represent.
Dr. Bainomugisha.
I have a slight difference with my colleague Nicholas. We always agree, but on this one, yes, I tend to I agree with him to some extent, but to another extent, really I don't. First, it is to agree that Uganda is operating in a multi-party system. Because if you pursue your line of looking at Uganda per se without recognizing the fact on the ground, the political reality that we're a multi-party system, then you take us back to the movement system, which Ugandans voted to change from in July 2005. And so because we are a multi-party political system, it is politics that is at work. Now, if it's politics at work, then and first and secondly, because the elections of the representatives in the East African Legislative Assembly is by the electorate. Actually, is the parliament, and this parliament is dominated by the movement. The majority are movement. So the elections are likely actually to also be influenced by the interests of the majority party, of the ruling party. That one you cannot discount. And so the NRM certainly it will have some dominance. It will certainly have dominance. Let me finish, because that's the reality on the ground. Secondly, but of course, also remember that at the East African Legislative Assembly, the ruling parties in these countries, the 5 member countries of East Africa, also project the interests of the ruling parties there. So what is likely to happen, unless the treaty really says it, that you must affirmatively elect people from civil society, from academia, from the ruling parties, and there is a formula, you are still likely to see majority of the ruling parties across these countries are coming into it. And unfortunately, of course, what is happening here, since we went to the multi-party system, it's the winner takes it all model that applies. So, of course, it would be important that while we play politics in these parliaments, that our country always comes first. But I can assure you, human beings, the way they are and the fact that we're in a multi-party dispensation, the majority will try to dominate.
Well, listeners, this is Spectrum on Radio, and tonight we're reviewing the week. Our guests, Mr. Nicholas Opiyo, legal consultant at AKIJUL, and Dr. Bainomugisha, head of the Peace and Security Program at ACODE. We've just been joined by Mr. Asuman Basalirwa, President of the JEEMA Party, also known as Justice Forum. You're most welcome, Honorable Basalirwa.
Thank you, and good evening, all our listeners. Just to mention, Asuman has been seconded by his party to also contest for EALA.
Yeah. Talk to us about what do you think? Well, we know you're a consensus.
You're an
interested party in that position. Talk to us about the ideal. Let's try a little bit about your own interests here. Talk to us about the ideal. What should be happening there?
Well, I think I want us to look at the spirit of this whole treaty. When you really read the treaty and its organs, there is something that is recurrent in that treaty. I've been looking at the organs in that treaty, you know, the summit, the Council of Ministers, the coordinating committee consisting of permanent secretaries and the rest. There is one statement which is recurrent. That statement is about consensus. Consensus. Decisions at summit level will be by consensus. Decisions at Council of Ministers, consensus. Coordinating committee, consensus. So I think the presidents, when they were adopting this treaty, and those who actually structured this treaty, consider the consensus as more important than any other consideration. I remember when we were negotiating the IPC, it was supposed to have broken far much earlier, until we all agreed that what is going to be the driving force in all this issue is really consensus and not numerical strength. And we agreed that all organs, FDC were the biggest party, JEEMA,
in the
IPC.
Yes.
Maybe that's the reason the IPC collapsed. No. By the way, it collapsed because of other reasons.
Go on.
And yes. So on that front, there was success. At least people were able to conceal their ego, their so-called bigness and the rest, and focused on the greater goal. And when you look at the EALA, this should really be driven by consensus. Unfortunately, we don't seem to be moving towards that. And we have a problem in this country. You know, there is no inventing any wheel here. You just look at what is happening elsewhere. You can look at the European Union. In fact, in the European Union, they are more driven by populations of the countries. But in their system, digressive proportionality, they allow countries with the smaller populations to have bigger representation. So I don't know why.
Kind of talking about countries, but we are talking about political parties.
Yes, I'm saying, and the difference here is that because we are going to move towards that. This idea of numerical strength, by the way, it's an idea which was in the previous rules that we are challenged by Honorable Jacob Olanya. When you look at the previous rules, the element there was sharing on the basis of numerical strength. And when Olanya went to court, those rules were nullified.
Okay.
So I think what we are trying to see here is to appreciate. I want to tell you that if the NRM is really wants to take the bigger share, my argument is that they have already gotten enough. For example, they have already nominated one of their cadres, the Honorable Jessica Rio, is the Deputy Secretary General. Deputy Secretary General.
Yes.
A very high profile position within the structure of EALA.
That's true.
I mean within the structure of the community. I don't think they should really be clamoring for some of these other aspects.
Just tell us, how many would you recommend that the NRM actually second?
No,
what
is the treaty saying? Because you see,
it is here.
It is there, and people have read it. You know, today, whenever these things happen, I usually go back to my notes to reflect. Today I was reading interpretation of treaties. You know, when at my master's level, I was doing the law of treaties, and I was reading interpretation of treaties.
Yes.
And there was one thing which was very interesting. In interpretation of documents and treaties inclusive, the order of words also matters.
Yes.
When you look at that treaty, when they are talking about feasibility, the first aspect is political parties. That
That is the first aspect.
Yes.
So the feasibility in the first aspect must be with regard to political parties. Then we move to phase 2, shades of opinion, then gender and other interest groups. Now when you are looking at feasibility, the treaty envisages that the first aspect of feasibility would really be with regard to political parties. And in this aspect, by the way, there is no absurdity when you apply the literal interpretation.
Yes.
Is that the contention should be on the remaining positions,
All right.
but not actually on the first, because that is feasible.
Okay.
It is possible. It is possible. It is possible for all parties represented in Parliament to have representation.
Right.
It is possible and feasible. But let me comment briefly on this
But you have
aspect.
small parties with one MP sharing the same number of seats with 200, someone a party that has 200 seats.
Exactly.
That's ridiculous. Some people.
It is not ridiculous. That's why Burundi, with the population of 9 million people,
pays the same amount.
is sharing the same number of legislators with Tanzania that has 44 million people.
All right.
In fact, the idea of this whole community was not premised on numbers. Don't talk about numbers across board. This argument of numbers, I foresee, my own thinking is that it's going to drive us into an amendment of this treaty, because it is now being highlighted. Now countries are going to become conscious.
Okay.
We are running. Why do we have fewer representatives? And I think it is going to set a very bad precedent.
My problem, you never told me how many should be. Are you proposing?
I think he's given a principle.
No. I have told you that when you look at the treaty, the first element of feasibility, and I told you in the construction of documents, order of words matters. The first element is political parties.
No, we are talking to ordinary people out there.
Exactly.
And I want people to understand that what you are proposing, because what you are still legalistic. I just want us to be so ordinary.
No. I am not
communicate to people.
Yes.
That, yes, that they are not.
I am not being
the NRM wants 6.
Okay.
It wants only 3 for others.
Now,
so what?
No. Maybe let's respond to that. I have said that the contention should be on the remaining 3.
The remaining 3.
Yes. In fact, nobody is even, by the way, it is possible for the NRM, whichever way you want to take it, to move out of this conundrum with the majority.
Okay.
Because even if you said that the independent, even if you said each party represented in Parliament should have 1 person, then 1 seat goes to the independents, and the 2 go to NRM. Okay. This independent will still be NRM leaning, because at the end of it all, it is they who are going to vote on it. So I think they will retain a majority. Now, fortunately, finally on this aspect, fortunately on this aspect,
I told you he's interested in this matter. So
no. With or without this aspect, I think fortunately in this aspect, we are going to operate like the UN Security Council.
Very briefly, yes.
Yes.
How does it do it? Very briefly.
Veto.
The
permanent members.
Yes.
And let's talk about the position I like to exercise.
Adela was arrested. Do you think he surrendered or was he arrested? And what do you think should happen to him? Should he be forgiven?
I think surrendering and being arrested is almost the same thing. But I think
surrendering and being arrested is almost the same thing.
It's almost the same thing. And I think, of course, whatever the circumstances, is that actually he's out of action in terms of his military engagement. He's in the hands of the government of Uganda. And I think the issue now is about the issue is what should be done, whether he qualifies for amnesty or whether he should be prosecuted. And actually, I think first, he's not actually one of those indicted by the ICC.
Yes.
But now, in terms, I have heard people, of course, like the DP president, Norbert Mao, saying that he should be pardoned and he should get the amnesty. But I think it may not be necessary now. Because to just give him a blank amnesty, first of all, he has not asked for, but second, of course, without considering what the victims on the ground would want to be done. Because then what would be, because also it would look very political, it may look a military strategy for now, that actually give him amnesty so that many of them can desert. But what about the delivery of justice to the various victims that have suffered under the LRA? But thirdly, the impunity. I know I will disagree with my brother here, Nicholas, but I think also granting general amnesty to the LRA, especially those that first were actually, they willingly joined the rebellion, because there are people who were abducted, have grown now, they are adult, but they were child soldiers when they were abducted. Now, when you capture those ones, whether in action or out of act or surrender, I think really the amnesty it becomes very important because they are victims. But a man like Achilam really willingly joined the rebellion and has been captured, and I think he doesn't. I think the rule of law should, because if we maintain this kind of stand, we are likely to continue to perpetuate rebellions and impunity, and it also will also perpetuate the war economy, that you go and wage a war, and finally when you come home you become a millionaire. So I think we need to break the cycle of this one. But of course I would add that I think he needs to get justice. Real justice must be given to him, of course, to break the cycle of rebellion in this country, because the country remains a hostage to the warlords.
Nicholas.
Well, thank you, Edmond. Of course, I deeply disagree with the doctor on key aspects of this submission. Reasons are very clear.
Some of them.
But just to start with, the context is important. That before we've had arrests of senior commanders of the LRA. Mr. Banya was arrested. Sam Kolo was captured. Thomas Koyolo was captured. That did not in itself break down the LRA. They continued to commit atrocities, in Sudan, in Congo, and elsewhere. So I think the arrest in itself, even though it's so significant, it not necessarily mean an end or a serious weakening of the LRA. But it's a huge score for the Americans who deployed their troops here. I saw the Undersecretary for African Affairs, Ben Carson, speaking today about the arrest and saying it's significant. It shows that their investment was
former ambassador of this
place. Yeah. So exactly. So in that sense, it's so significant.
Yes.
Now the question then is, what should be done to him? I think there should not even be a question of what should be done to him. The options are very clear.
What should be done?
The options are that if and when he asks for amnesty, he is entitled to it. The country, in its own wisdom, enacted the amnesty law, the intention of which was to forgive those who
sin against us,
who have sinned against us, if you like.
If they are.
Just a minute. With the exception of the 5 who were indicted by the ICC, all the rest have got the option to apply for amnesty. So when and if he applies for amnesty, he does adequately qualify. Secondly, he could be taken to court and tried if he doesn't apply for amnesty. So the options are his to choose. If he chooses to apply for amnesty, he's entitled to it, and actually should be granted. If you do not grant him, he actually will end up in the same situation the Koyelo case is ending up in.
Asuman, you two are a lawyer. Talk to us about this.
Yes, I think let's first correct the impression that Achilam willingly joined the rebellion.
Yes.
I think what is clear is that Achilam was among those who were abducted by ACODE.
Yes.
So he never willingly joined the rebellion.
Are you sure?
Yes. He never willingly joined the rebellion. He was actually abducted. And that brings us to the question. At the time of his abduction, where were those who were supposed to provide security to him? Because you see, this argument of Achilam raises moral and legal political issues. The moral issue is that many people died. Atrocities were committed. People are hurt. They lost their dear ones. And that is legitimate. All of us will feel for our loved ones. That's very legitimate. Now it raises the political question on the responsibility of the state to protect its citizens. Achilam would not have been abducted had the state...
Well, you're talking about the ideal situation, really. You're not telling us anything.
No. I'm talking about the moral, legal, political question.
Well, but that's a broad topic. Really.
Yes, it is broad, but we must put it in the context.
That's the ideal. We
must put it in the
years have gone by.
Yes.
Let's talk about
many years have gone by. But Edmond, The socialization you receive is as a result of the environment in which you are.
So let's talk about Achilam right now.
Yes, I'm talking about Achilam.
Yes.
I'm talking about Achilam. Because you are asking here that
should he be okay? Let's go for a break. This is Spectrum on Radio 1. We'll be back.
Wait, turn off the music, guys. Please, no like cows. My wife is calling, and I told her I was going to the farm.
Honey, how is the farm?
The farm is very fine.
And the cows?
You can hear they're grazing.
Well, next time tell them to eat grass and not me. I'm seated behind you.
Hi, honey.
Unlike humans, structures built with JEEMA cement don't lie. Different types of projects require different cement. We offer the widest range of cement products in the market and are most preferred by all kinds of builders. So if you're thinking about building, think JEEMA cement. JEEMA cement, part of you from the start.
Join Airtel today and get 50% bonus airtime instantly. That's right, 50% bonus airtime to call across all networks. Simply buy and register a new Airtel SIM card. Top up 1,000 shillings and more, and 50% bonus airtime to call across all networks is yours. Join Airtel today. Get bonus today.
Airtel.
John, Mike and I, we go back a bit. We knew John at the beginning, working for someone else. But he was different. He had vision, saw opportunities. He started working towards his goal, opened his own garage, and worked, learning the hard way. His reputation spread. Trust, consistency, quality. Soon people were coming to him from all parts. He made himself and his whole street prosper, and also helped friends, seeing potential in people and helping them on. But John never shouts about all his success. He's just who he is. Special.
So here's to men like John, who make a difference, who enjoy Nile Special, the rich, satisfying taste from the source. Nile Special. You've earned it.
Not for sale to persons under 18.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90.
On Spectrum tonight, we're reviewing the week. Guests tonight, Mr. Asuman, Basalirwa, President of the Justice Forum Party, also known as JEEMA, Mr. Nicholas Opiyo, Legal Consultant at AKIJUL, and Dr. Bainomugisha, Head of the Peace and Security Program at ACODE. You could send your text message. You might not be able to call in, but you can send your text message. What you can do is, what you need to do is type the word Spectrum in your phone browser, leave a space, message, question, or comment, send it to 7197. That is Spectrum. Message body, send it to 7197. Free up to 1,000 days in prison. Nicholas, the Uganda youth who are let go, should they get compensation? They say they've lost their livelihood. It's a long period of time they spent in jail.
Well, we shouldn't even be asking whether they should get compensation or not, because that's a given. That they were, if not maliciously, then wrongfully imprisoned for what they didn't do, or for what the state couldn't prove they did. And I think that what happened to them reflects a general trend. I mean, many of us know of cases of people who have been arrested, incarcerated, and eventually the court have acquitted them. It's become too consistent for it to just be an incident, because you know what happened to the walk-to-work cases, you know what has happened to many terror suspects, Kizito inclusive, whose trials really end up into acquittal for lack of evidence. In fact, the words of the judges in these cases are very scathing for any state. In the words of Justice Raffle Chan, heads should have been rolling, but in Uganda we go on as if it is business as usual. So I think that represents, in my view, a thorough and consistent misuse of arresting and investigation powers by the police. And then that is a very serious thing we've got to examine. I was speaking to a senior officer in the police, whose name I will not divulge because I can't do that now. They told me that even those who have been arrested for Aryong's murder, there's actually a report recommending that all those who have been charged should be freed because there's no evidence against them. They claim the real killer is still at large, and they have identified him. So you can see, yes, they have. In their words, they have.
So mentioned it in him.
Yeah. So
what kind of person is it?
So you can see. I mean, let's not go there because it's a matter of not yet in court. So the question is then that the misuse of arresting powers, the misuse of prosecution powers by the DPP the absolute failure for them to nail down credible people, credible suspects, is in my own view a very big rot in our justice system. You might blame the courts. In this case, the courts have come out on top. The courts have been very clear in seeing this fault, and I've mentioned it. I think we must begin to address the question of the structural weaknesses or the misuse of powers by the DPP in prosecuting people, especially people whose cases are more, leaning to politics, people like Asuman in this case. Secondly, we must begin to investigate the police method of work. How does the police identify suspects? How do they investigate? Do we really have an investigation department, a CID department that is well equipped and able to investigate a crime thoroughly? Or will we see a team that is going to keep arresting everybody else and nobody else is convicted? So I think those are the concerns for me. What happened to the Uganda riot suspects is completely deplorable. I think they should go to court and seek full compensation from the state.
Asuman?
Well, I want to associate myself with the submission of my Rwanda colleague and add that I attended the trial from the beginning to the end. There were 3 issues. Number one, there is a bad culture growing in this country of arrest first, investigate later. That's a very bad culture. Yes, it is a culture that has kept some of us in jail before. I have told you here, I was arrested, taken to Luzira for a full year, and I was arrested in broad daylight, by the way.
1 year. 1 year.
I was arrested in broad daylight about 11 in full view of the cameras. For a full year, the state was coming to court and saying, we are still investigating. We are still investigating. I have raised this with General Kaihura. I met him in Munyonyo at a function. He was meeting political parties. I said, how come police arrests people, then they do investigations later? So that's one big problem. Number two, people are asking that now that these people were acquitted, what happens? We saw the burning took place, lives were lost. It is true. I think the problem is for the state being political and not professional in their investigations. I want to tell you, if they had preferred charges, for example, malicious damage to property,
yes,
okay, and not terrorism, perhaps they would have secured the convictions. But you see, because you are so obsessed with politically persecuting people, you jump onto crimes that you don't have capacity to investigate. I'll tell you one scenario. They asked a police officer why he had to detain these people for more than 48 hours. And he tried to justify that situation. And nobody gave him a constitution. You read what the constitution says. And they ask you, by the way, what is your level of education? S4. And that's where the Justice Ochana had to close the file in anger. Okay? So I think there is a very big problem.
He wasn't qualified.
Now, what we should really be doing is to call upon the state really to be professional. Institutions that are charged with the responsibility of such matters must be professional. This idea of arresting people, investigating later, I think is going to cause us problems. That's why government never secures any conviction. He has just talked about these guys who are in Luzira. I am representing them. I am on the legal team. You are saying a person was stoned, okay? And even people are languishing in Luzira on demand. But logically, even basic logic, even people cannot hold a single stone to hit a person. And it's not about aiding and abetting. They are not accomplices. They are not what? But principles. So really, it's very laughable. I think we are treading a dangerous path. in as far as our criminal investigation.
Maybe we should investigate, but
I think
use of his power.
Exactly, the DPP, you know, people who are going to demonstrate at the DP's office, they are absolutely right. I think we should join them. There is a lot of misuse of powers. And those are my statements, they are not for Radio 1.
Well, we'll just be joined by Honorable Mike Sebalu, representative of the East African Legislative Assembly. Tonight we'll allow him the privilege of listening in without burdening him, asking him for his comments. Dr. Bainomugisha.
Yes, of course, my sympathies to the young people. Some of them could have been innocent, incarcerated for 1,000 days. Yeah, but sometimes, of course, I also want to sympathize with those people managing or running the state affairs, because when it is a situation of a riot, what do? Either the state collapses and the rioters take over the power, or the state comes in and uses the instruments at its disposal. So two things. I want to agree with both my colleagues that the Directorate of Public Prosecution needs to really to scale up, and I think that's an area that needs completely overhaul so that people can be prosecuted in record time and get their rights if they are incarcerated. But two, I also wanted to ask a question to my colleagues. Does the failure to prosecute these people successfully mean that they were innocent? I think that's also a question, because I also know that the law is not necessarily about justice. You can also use justice, rather the law, to defeat a just situation. Does it mean that? So that's why I think it is important, because tomorrow you'll be in a position of power and you'll be telling us another thing. But I also want to say that most of the African countries have used the Suppression of Terrorism Acts around Africa actually to suppress political rights, civil and political rights. And I think he's right that actually people could have been charged for malicious damage of property rather than actually for terrorism. And actually they could have, because some of these guys actually are not free. So I think we need to strengthen our investigation department, the CID. We need to strengthen the DPP. I've been a victim myself. Cases in court for 3 years, 4 years. Why justice delayed is justice denied.
Honorable Mike Sebalu, government's position on public salaries. The work government says they won't raise salaries, according to the Prime Minister, because they've been working on setting up a commission to determine salaries. We will talk to you. We'd like you to talk to us about the South African later. But first of all, talk to us about the public service. First of all, the commission is coming. It's been advocated for a long time. It's good news, but the issue of not raising salaries. Balance the two for us.
Yeah, I think I want to make just a brief comment about the riots.
Okay.
And what I want to say is that definitely the investigations may not have been that conclusive or thoroughly done, but we all agree there was a bad riot. Property was lost, lives were lost. I think no one is definitely there must be someone responsible for that. They may not be the one. So I think we need just to encourage efficiency of those systems in investigating, because definitely someone is responsible for that.
Ask them to find them.
Yeah. So I thought that could be done. And like someone said, you know, you lawyers are quite smart. You may find that actually one who did that is smiling. So that is the comment I wanted to make. Now regarding the issue of public salaries, definitely the idea of coming up with a commission to deal with this is a very, very important aspect.
People think it's long overdue.
Definitely it is. I agree it is long overdue. And definitely the idea of increasing salaries is something that needs to be given due consideration. But this needs to be well thought out. It needs to be very well researched. And some good measure of study needs to be done so that it is done scientifically. You know, doing things in an ad hoc basis is a bit of a problem, because today you increase, tomorrow you find you can't sustain, and it is a much bigger problem reducing after you are unable to meet the levels that you. But definitely the principle of increment is something that needs to be given good priority sooner than later.
But I think there are cases, there are public, thank you, the public servants that need quick, what you would call like
affirmative action.
No, first aid. Because if you delay, then the patient actually dies. So I think that the teachers, the health workers may not need really to wait for the commission, because the commission really should take its time and do a thorough job. But those people who really are living at the margins of life, like our teachers, and yet we know that education is the key to the transformation of this country. I think an increment to like 0.5
would be an interim measure to cater for the short that allow the commission to really do a good job.
There are two issues here that we must differentiate. The question of the law. Because I think that there is no shortage of a regime for determining emoluments and benefits of people in public service. The Public Service Commission established under our Constitution has that mandate. The only problem that arises if and when people who fall outside the public service, because public service is defined under the Constitution to exclude people like MPs, ministers, the President, the Speaker, Deputy Speaker. Now the problem arises when you begin to compare the practice within public service with those who fall outside of the public service, such as MPs, such as people like KCCA and all the lot. So the point is, I think the principle is we must unify methods or a formula of increment or standardization of all payments and emoluments across the board.
Include the URA,
including all government parastatals, all government parastatals, all public service must fall within the same. It is
level of responsibility.
It is practicable. Once you have a formula, the formula take into account level of responsibility, the nature of work you do, that also be commensurate to
allowing the forces of the market.
Yeah,
that competition.
That is going to also require a constitutional amendment.
Yeah, my point is that there are certain like these parastatals that actually may not have to be at the same level, and I think that this is what happens elsewhere in the world. I mean, they set targets for you, you work day and night, you work on Saturdays, which civil servants sometimes are not subjected to, and then for that reason, that's why actually I have no problem with Jennifer Musisi of KCC. The targets she must achieve, and she gets a lot of money, and so again, so it's subjecting people to the same uniform thing is then like communism. We need to be
Yes, well, I want to slightly differ from the submissions of my colleagues here. They are making an assumption that the problem we have is really absence of a commission to standardize and look at
you don't think it's an important thing? It's a milestone?
I don't think it's a challenge. I don't think it's a problem. This country is endowed with a lot of resources. The problem here in this country is actual abuse of resources. It's not even the absence of this. Without this, we have capacity to properly remunerate our civil servants or workers across board. Annually, we lose about 500 billion in corruption.
Yes.
Annually. Okay? How much could such an amount of money be doing? Okay?
Just chipping, the minister is alleged to have said that it's okay for public servants to
get commission.
Yeah, and get commission. With the due respect, it was a street argument. Very pedestrian argument. And I think it should be given the content it deserves, the statement of the minister. And I'm surprised he stood by it.
So, this thing has nothing to do with corruption, I think. It has nothing to do with corruption. What actually need is what the commission, you see, corruption actually, first of all, is like corruption will never be eradicated, you know that. It's like poverty. But it can be reduced to a level that doesn't break it. But the point that we are talking about here is establishing systems, is rationalizing payments or salaries, but also motivating our civil servants to be productive, to have to be, of course, invest to steering.
Before we move forward. He talked about sustainability, and that's why corruption becomes very important here. You are going to introduce this with a view of harmonizing salaries, perhaps increment, because of the theft and corruption inherent in the NRM government. We will renege government.
That's a very strong word.
What is inherent? I am telling you. I have told you here.
Maybe rampant, but not inherent.
Inherent.
Judging the psyche of the party.
I'm talking about the NRM government. Okay, inherent in the NRM government.
Maybe rampant, but you can say inherent.
Yeah, Edmond, don't fear. I'm the one making the statement. If I'm going to lose it,
when you say inherent, it means it's in their psyche, in their fiber. When you say it's rampant, that's
no. By the way, as a student of literature, I choose my words deliberately. I am using the word inherent very deliberately.
Well, I think
500 billion shillings annually in corruption. Okay, it's not.
I think that's a very strong word.
So the point I am making is that you have commissions. My senior colleague, the Honorable Sebalu, was talking about sustainability. Okay, you will not have that sustainability
of what?
Of the salaries if you don't check.
Well, but that's the point of having a commission. To do a scientific analysis.
No. I'm talking about the commission being in place.
Yes.
Okay.
Very briefly, I need to move.
Talking about enhancement of salaries. I'm talking about failure to reduce areas where resources are wasted,
let's move forward.
And the enhancement will not be sustainable.
If you allow me, just a small thing to my brother, that this commission should not only focus on the civil servants. I'm glad they're talking about public servants, even the members of parliament, because there has been an outcry that they cannot be allowed to set their own salaries. So I would want a commission that actually looks holistically also at the issue of our members of parliament.
Talk to us about the internal crisis in the not that you are an insider, but talk to us about the we are told that all right, okay. FDC President Dr. Besigye is supposed to be meeting with MPs of his political party to try and cool them down after they deferred with the leader of the opposition. Is it a judgment, an indictment of Nandala Mafabi's leadership?
Well, I'm not very competent to comment about the internal dynamics of FDC, but all I can say is that I wish them well. I don't want to believe that that is happening, but I wouldn't be surprised if it were happening either, because you're dealing with human beings. And one thing I can say in that respect is that we are still in the process of growing multipartism. That is still a challenge to many parties. You know, the whole idea of believing that we are working collectively and you have collective responsibility, I think we still have a lot of individual merit in us, to the extent that there are moments where people feel that they need to pick their line of view at the expense of the collective view. I believe with the time we should be able to get to grips with the demands and dictates of democracy and the multi-parties. And those cases will decline as we get more and more
mature.
Yeah, we get mature is rather too strong. As we get more used to the tenets of democracy under multi-partism. So those challenges wouldn't. It's not a big surprise, given that we are still in a nascent stage of nurturing multi-party democracy.
If it happens, if this happens, if we see a movement, a big break away from the FDC to the movement, then it spells doom, it spells bad for the democracy in this country. But also it is symptomatic, of course, of failure of democracy. But I also know failure of democracy, because it will weaken the opposition will die, and when the opposition in this country has finally died and have joined, then we'll have a single party system, and corruption can only intensify, and internal contradictions can only intensify, leading actually to almost collapse and conflict and insecurity. So for me, I would want to advise, and I've done a study for 4 years on government opposition relations. Uganda has not graduated from this. All incumbent governments invest in killing the opposition. But whenever they have succeeded, they develop an internal contradiction. The internal opposition, which is worse, is another strain of a virus that actually has destroyed the political fabric of this country and led this country to crisis. In 1969, UPC, of course, was able to declare Uganda a one-party state. By 1971, the internal contradiction within the UPC had led to the military coup of Idi Amin. Right. So we see the opposition now, they are very poor, and I think that's why it is important to begin funding the opposition within the political party financing, so that they are able to survive in opposition. You look at them, they are in a sort of state, succeed in destroying them
at the individual level,
destroy the country as well.
They can't pay themselves, they can't live a good life.
Sincerely, when we looking at what is happening in FDC, I can only but just be happy that we are seeing a party evolving, a party trying to find its true position within the body politics of this country. Because if I can liken that to giving a bath, not that I know the pains, but that this is akin to, you know, labor pains. A beautiful child in FDC is going to emerge. What you see in FDC is a process of a party evolving and understanding its true identity and how it can withstand, resist, or stave off a very strong party in the NRM, because you know that all the FDC problems are being linked to the NRM, that because the Honorable Bainomugisha apparently is very close to the president, and so she might be a mole, you know, all these kind of things. So I think it's a good thing. The party is evolving, and I think the FDC party will be better off for it. I also think that in the process of doing so, we need not spoil people's names. I know the Honorable Bainomugisha very well. I spoke to her. I think with her Catholic background, she's one of the most honest people you can ever find in this country. I can tell you.
But something small. I think there is something that is lacking here. Maybe democracy is not being appreciated, because I see nothing wrong if you're a national leader to relate to other players. I find a problem where an opposition person talks to a person, and that becomes a head of parliament. You're a national leader, and you should relate even to the president without any problem, as long as you remain principled. And the idea is that lady is a principled lady. She puts her point across. So what is wrong with a leader from any party? Because I even hear people taking serious issue when an opposition person goes to attend a national function. I mean, that is narrow, and we need to go beyond that kind of
But before we go, let's talk about the East African Legislative Assembly. You are there, you are standing. What should be happening?
Yeah, the East African Legislative Assembly is on. It explains. Look at his face. It explains where I've worked, because the dynamics are quite moving fast, and I have to be in tandem with them. But what we need to appreciate is that we are due to have an election and not a selection. Because there are people who are arguing as if it should be a selection. This is an election, and it is a democratic process, and we should appreciate that you have a right to participate, but that does not guarantee you a right to win. Once you subject yourself to an election, you should be ready for results. And I want to give you Tanzania has elected 7 out of 9 from a given party. Uganda has elected 6 out of 9 from a given party. Burundi did elect, and 5 out of, once they balance the Hutu, Twa, and So I think we should be comfortable, and the election is on.
Honorable Mike Sebalu, the East African Legislative Assembly. Asuman, Basalirwa, Nicholas Opiyo, Dr. Bainomugisha.
Good luck to you and Asuman in the elections. I hope you know.
All right, thank you for tuning in. Spectrum will be back on Monday.
When these big brothers are pretending, you come and with.
You can pay